Okay, welcome to my kitchen, everybody. We are doing biscotti, two kinds. We'll start with cranberry biscotti this morning. The recipe is from my mom, who is an amazing cook, and she actually has a kitchen in her house where she makes chocolates and truffles and all sorts of things. And unlike me, she's a recipe inventor. So this is actually her recipes. Once I have a great recipe, it just gets put in my binder and I don't change it. It just remains the same. So we're going to start off with 1.5 cups of flour, and then your oats, all of your dry ingredients, your brown sugar. We've got salt, baking powder, baking soda. And then we have cranberries and whole pecans. And we can just whisk all the dry ingredients together. I like that this recipe, you don't have to get your Bosch mixer out. You can just, you don't need a lot of kitchen tools. You can just use your basic kitchen tools. Okay, so the dry ingredients are all together. And then we have our wet ingredients. And the recipe calls for room temperature eggs because it helps with rising, and recipes also cook faster if you have room temperature eggs. So let's say you did a cake and you used chilled eggs from the fridge, you would just have to cook it a little bit longer. So whisk your eggs, and to that you can add your pure vanilla and your maple syrup. Okay, and then we will combine the wet with the dry. Okay, I've mixed everything up together, the wet and the dry, and now I'm just going to sprinkle some flour on my counter. The dough, it's quite wet actually, so I'll divide it into 2 equal portions. Just kind of shape a ball. And the flour also, once it's baked and cooled and sliced, it does give it a nice color on the top. Okay, then we're going to shape these into 2 approximately 12-inch logs. And just kind of press it together. You can get out your tape measure too if you want. I can go a little bit, another inch. Usually flip it over a couple times just to make sure there's lots of flour on there. And it's not that fragile, then you can just lift it up and place it on a baking tray lined with parchment. Then I'll get the other one shaped up here. Biscotti is one of the rare holiday items that I bake that doesn't have flour in it. So although it doesn't have butter in it. So although there's lots of good ingredients like dark chocolate, whole oats, nuts, raw nuts, and cranberries, it's still a high calorie treat, but I don't feel quite as guilty indulging in it. Okay, so the cranberry pecan are ready to go in the oven. Okay, now it's time for double chocolate almond biscotti. We've got 2 cups of flour, your white sugar, cocoa powder, all your cinnamon, sea salt, baking powder, baking soda, your whole raw almonds, and that's the dry ingredient, so I like to just whisk those to incorporate together. I call this double chocolate because there's the cocoa powder plus the European chocolate. So I tried, I've always used the European chocolate, and my family were just kind of chocolate snobs because of my mom's chocolate business. So we buy the Calabo, and I actually used my husband's, just a chisel from his toolbox to chunk this up today. But I did try this recipe with chocolate chips, and it's just not quite the same. The content of chocolate chips between the European chocolate is just differs slightly. So what I'm going to do is I like to use a double boiler on my stove to melt the chocolate. So I'll get that ready, and then I'll do the wet ingredients. Okay, I am just putting the wet ingredients, the eggs, with your pure vanilla and your pure almond extract. And I always use a double boiler to melt my chocolate. I think there's several ways you can do it. So here's the melted chocolate. Sorry, so not professional. Who doesn't like chocolate? It's so special, especially when it's all melted too. Okay, you got your wet all incorporated, and we'll just put that in with the dry. And then we'll mix those together. Okay, depending on how much chocolate you end up melting, my dough's quite like a little bit dry this time compared to last time, so I'm just going to add a little bit of milk to help it bind to each other, or you could just add a little bit more chocolate. That's the trouble. Sometimes I just sort of cook, not using the recipe so well. If you put too much, like more chocolate in, it will just be more chocolatey and more delicious. Okay, so I'm going to create 2 dough balls. Biscotti has been just a go-to for me for holiday gift giving. I find, actually I just made some last week for Mike to take to the ER for his nurses, and it makes a great gift if you combine it with like hot apple cider or Starbucks salted caramel cocoa. I love that this is a holiday treat that can be made in advance, and it freezes really great. I just stick it in some Rubbermaid totes in the freezer. Go a little bit longer there. Okay. There's one chocolate and the last one. And then we'll pop these in the oven. Both biscottis, cranberry, pecan, and the chocolate almond in the same oven, 350 for about 20. Okay, the biscotti came out of the oven, and you can see it with the chocolate. It has this nice crinkled top on it, and it's just let it cool for about 10 minutes. I already did that. We had to have a longer pause than was expected. And when you cut it, then you get these really nice, you can see the whole nuts here. Sharpen your knife. You should have a pretty sharp knife when you do this because you are cutting through the whole nuts. And then on the, you've got the whole pecans and the cranberries. It looks really pretty on this one as well. Some people, if you like your biscotti extra crispy, you can, once sliced, you can transfer it back to your parchment lined baking sheet and put it in the oven for another 10 minutes. That will just kind of dry it out a little bit more. We tend to like ours a little moist and chewier, and so we just bake it only once. Once it's completely cooled, you can store it in Rubbermaids, and then you can layer it with parchment in between, and it keeps in your freezer until you're ready to use. And then my favorite gift presentation is the cellophane bags. I usually find them at Dollarama. If they don't have them, Michael's will. And they look, you know, kind of lovely when you tie them all up and present as gifts. So happy baking!